Story 1. I cannot blame them one bit. If they cannot pay the bills, they should find another job. The air traffic control crisis is not their problem to solve. Story 2. What else are they supposed to do? Rack up debt and hope they will get paid eventually? I do not blame them one bit. It is a terrible position to be put in. Story 3. If my employer stopped paying me for a month, I would quit. They should too. Story 4. Do you expect them to work for free while their bills are unpaid and they cannot afford food? Story 5. Most air traffic controllers are not quitting. It is incredibly hard to become a certified controller, so most endure whatever comes their way and retire as soon as eligible at age 50 or after 25 years of service. The issue going forward is newer controllers can earn the same or slightly less without the horrible schedule, lack of sleep, mandatory overtime, chronic understaffing, and a pay system that has not been properly updated since 2009. I know a handful who quit during training in a field that is already short by 4,000 certified controllers. Many people who hear that controllers make six figures do not understand how underpaid they are for what they do and endure. It is common for controllers to die within 2 to 3 years of retirement, and there is a growing number who have taken their own lives because of the stress of this job and its effects on the body. Story 6. Working for no pay is a hard no for me. I do not blame anyone else for doing the same. Story 7. It is easy to imagine Transportation Security Administration employees finding new jobs. Air traffic controllers are far less likely to leave a $150,000 per year job with excellent benefits and a retirement plan because of a temporary shutdown. Story 8. They have to take care of themselves. We must direct our anger and frustration appropriately. I think the shutdown is intended to create chaos so the Republicans can point fingers at the Democrats over the Epstein files and related issues. I used to play both sides, but I cannot do that anymore. The Republican Party has become the Trump First Party. Story 9. I do not blame them at all. No one should be expected to work without pay, not in a society that supposedly prohibits slavery. Story 10. Especially with President Trump saying he might not pay government employees once the shutdown ends, I do not blame them. I said this when Elon Musk started interfering with the government workforce. You have no idea how much damage you are doing. Once job security is removed from the list of positives for government work, there is not enough left to justify it. Government employees already earn significantly less than the private sector, have worse schedules, and carry more responsibilities. Not only are current employees quitting, fewer people want to enter government work. We will have to pay much higher wages to keep positions filled going forward. Story 11. What do you think about someone quitting a job because they were not being paid? Story 12. I am dating an air traffic controller. You do not understand the impact this con artist has had on them. He has done irreversible damage to the reputation and honor these air traffic controllers earned. They have one of the most stressful jobs on the planet. They show up to work in snowstorms and floods, yet they have been made the enemy of the American people because one man says so. The majority of them are veterans. It is deplorable and embarrassing what they have been through. The Cheeto-in-chief slams and demeans them for whatever narrative of the day is in his rotting brain. I cannot wait for that big, beautiful headline. Story 13. The cherry on top is Trump insulting those who took time off from air traffic control. Story 14. As an outsider, I genuinely do not understand the American system. I find it ridiculous that workers are expected to work without pay. I understand that this is related to the budget, but it is especially unacceptable in high-pressure jobs like air traffic control. Do they really want the people responsible for the safety of millions of people distracted by worrying about how they will pay their bills or get food? It seems like the American government system is designed to harm the American people. Story 15. Did you know that in some countries, when a government is about to shut down, citizens elect a new leader on the spot? Story 16. I fully support their decision. No one in 2025 should be expected to work without pay. What people need to realize is that this is not just about individual hardship. It is a domino effect. If Transportation Security Administration agents and air traffic controllers start quitting, those positions cannot be quickly or efficiently replaced. The hiring and training process takes months or longer. Meanwhile, no one else is hiring in the same numbers, so those workers are left without options. Flights will be delayed or canceled, which costs airlines and passengers money. In the end, no one wins. Not the workers, the travelers, or the economy. Story 17. I would not blame them for leaving, but the cost-benefit analysis for an air traffic controller is different from that for a target employee or an average white-collar paper pusher. Right now, they are not being paid. At some point, some may be unable to pay their bills, while others may have a high-earning spouse or savings to cover the gap. The tipping point is different for everyone. If they quit, what then? Air traffic control is a specialized career controlled by the federal government. Since many come from the military, returning is not a good option for many. As government employees, their benefits in normal times are substantial. Are they going to give up years of service toward their pension or their health care because of a shutdown? These are tough decisions, and I understand why many choose to stay. Story 18. I think people have to eat and pay their rent or mortgage. I cannot understand how anyone can expect them to do that for free while the government collects trillions in taxes and has the means to pay, just because some older people cannot sit down and reach an agreement. Story 19. I do not understand how a government shutdown can affect money that has already been allocated or guaranteed to people or programs. Close non-essential offices if necessary, but you still pay rents and leases during a shutdown, so pay the people you hired as well. If anyone should not be paid during a shutdown, it should be the people who caused it. Story 20. I do not work for free. The first time you tell me that you are not going to pay me, I stop showing up. Story 21. I think they are owed wages and compensatory damages due to wage theft, paid directly out of the ballroom fund. Story 22. They should be able to sue for all the damages missing paychecks caused them, including emotional damages, such as being unable to afford a date night and loss of consortium. Story 23. I feel sorry for those people. That is an extremely stressful job to begin with, and then they have to deal with this kind of issue. I respect those who are fighting through this and hope they get what they deserve in the long run. Story 24. Remember that they will have a little more than 3 years to deal with the current administration. Why would I want that lack of stability in my income? Story 25. As they should. If I miss even one check, I will be out of a job. Story 26. I am fine with Transportation Security Administration employees quitting, but air traffic is what worries me. Story 27. What would you do if you were not paid for a month but expected to work 60 hours a week? 99% of people would quit. Donald Trump is an ass, threatening them. Sure is for the working man, isn't he? Make America great again. Story 28. Everyone seems to mention that there will be back pay. The problem is when some of those employees live paycheck to paycheck with children. You cannot blame them. Story 29. Fully support it. Tank the industry and give the assholes at the top something to really complain about. I'd like to see airlines forced to cancel 20% of their flights daily. I want to see the rich bleed. Story 30. Just because the United States government decided to shut down does not mean that anything else did. These people still need to pay their bills. A requirement to work without pay is tantamount to slavery. Story 31. I think it should be illegal for the government to require that of them. Story 32. I support them 100%. They have no obligation to do 1 second of work if they are not paid for it. Story 33. I don't blame anyone for refusing to work for free. Life is expensive. Story 34. They should. The legislators treat them as pawns instead of human beings. I would be sick of it too. Story 35. I understand the sentiment. The situation is awful. But air traffic controllers are not going to quit. They earn 6-figure salaries. Where would they go with that skill set? It is a unique government job. If they quit, they would become unemployed and lose their paychecks, which would not solve the problem. The job market for similar positions would be tight. If they have no income now, quitting will not make money appear, and even if they find a new job, it may be weeks before they are paid because of hiring processes. None of you encouraging them to quit would do it yourselves. If you want to show solidarity, contact the Air Traffic Control Union and tell them you are quitting your job in solidarity. they will call you a fool. Story 36. I am pretty sure the shutdown will end as soon as the House of Representatives votes, today or tomorrow, and then all the traffic controllers will receive back pay. It would be strange to resign now at the end of the shutdown. Story 37. I don't blame them, and it's going to have a long-lasting effect on travel. Story 38. This is terrible. Not many people can afford to be unpaid for who knows how long. Story 39. What would you do if you worked in a high-stress job and did not get paid for over a month? Story 40. No one is actually quitting over this. Workers cannot leave these jobs and earn the same amount of money elsewhere. Story 41. Maybe they want to become this generation's professional air traffic controllers organization. In 1981, that organization attempted a strike and its members were fired. These young people may not remember, but Pepperidge Farm remembers. Story 42. It is a month longer than I would have worked without pay, but then again I have transferable skills. Story 43. This is exactly what I did in 2018. I was fortunate that I could retire. 40 years ago, when I started working for the Navy as a civilian, we had shutdowns that lasted a few hours or a day, and we still came to work. Starting with Newt Gingrich's contract with America, the shutdowns became longer, but at least we were paid afterward. Under Donald Trump, the disruption escalated. We had the longest shutdown at the time, later exceeded by the current one. At some point, employees begin looking for second jobs and then get hired away. Donald Trump, George H. W. Bush, George W. Bush, and Ronald Reagan have so eroded pay and benefits, especially retirement, that long-term employees have more incentive to stop putting up with the nonsense and leave. The harm is exacerbated by a hiring process that is interminable. Story 44. The social contract of work is that you work and you are paid. If you are not paid, you are under no obligation to work. Many people have families to feed and little savings, so they must do what is best for their families. It is the responsibility of our elected representatives to ensure the government functions, and asking people to work without pay does not accomplish that. Story 45. My friend is an air traffic controller. Right now he tells us he is okay because he has enough saved up, but I know not everyone is in that position. You have to do what you have to do to stay afloat. Story 46. I do not think you will catch me on a plane for a while. Remember all those military helicopter crashes in early 2025. I bet. Story 47. I would not have worked for a day without pay. Fuck Trump. Story 48. Is anyone here besides me old enough to remember what happened under President Reagan when the Professional Air Traffic Controllers Union went on strike? He got away with it then, and President Trump would too today. Story 49. I think they need to watch the news and then accurately remember which party chose not to pay them. Story 50. It is difficult, but bills are still due. These people may have families who need to be fed. If quitting and finding another job is a last resort, they do what they have to. Story 51. I think they should all go on strike as an act of defiance toward both the Republicans and the Democrats who sold us out. Story 52. Do not blame them at all. The next president should run on a platform that requires a new election whenever there is a shutdown. Story 53. I wouldn't blame them. Why put the public at risk by making these people work overtime without pay? Some are working part-time jobs to feed their families when they should be resting. Story 54. If Transportation Security Administration workers and air traffic controllers start leaving because of this, it could create a significant shortage of train staff, and airports might struggle to run smoothly even after pay issues are resolved. Losing experienced workers could also make it harder to train new personnel and increase stress for remaining staff, which would make the entire system more frustrating for travelers. Story 55. I would never work for no pay. I understand and support their decision to walk off the job and not return. Story 56. I worked at a job that started delaying our pay periods, and I hung on until they literally laid me off because they were not going to be able to keep payroll going. Good for the Transportation Security Administration and air traffic employees for being smarter than I was. Story 57. I wish all workers across the country could stop working for a month to show how crucial American workers are to the wealth of the 1%. Federal shutdowns are entirely a choice. We do not need caps on federal spending. No country that issues its own sovereign currency requires them. Story 58. The government is going to open by the end of the week. The people who actually run America have told their puppets to do so. Story 59. Do you all think it is that easy to find a replacement job? The calculation here is not simply quitting or working for free. It is to stay and hope to get back pay while preserving seniority, retirement, pay scale, healthcare, and so on, or to start from scratch at minimum wage, most likely beginning work immediately. They are heavily vested in their jobs, and it is not easy to walk away from years of job equity. This is especially hard when the shutdown has no end date. It could end tomorrow or last until next month. Also, air traffic control is about as niche a skill as you can get. It is not as if they all have a professional degree to fall back on. Story 60. Well, that should not be a problem since the Democrats folded yesterday. Story 61. There is a deal to end the shutdown that includes back pay. They always receive back pay. It is annoying, but I have survived government shutdowns before and would not quit over it. Story 62. I do not understand why someone would work if they are not being paid for a month, a week, or even an hour. Story 63. Personally, I think federal employees should be compensated at 1.25 to 1.5 times their normal pay, or receive hazard pay, during shutdowns with payments issued when a shutdown ends. Maybe there could be a voluntary insurance system that every federal employee can contribute to, creating a rainy day fund for shutdowns. It could accrue interest, and if not needed, the funds would be paid back to the employee. I do not know. I am sure someone could design something better, but I am just tossing out ideas. Story 64. Do it. I wouldn't blame them if they did. But a bigger question: why shouldn't air traffic controllers be employed by the airport instead of being paid by the government? That sounds like it would fix the issue pretty quickly. Story 65. Air traffic controllers are not quitting anytime soon. They make far too much money to just quit. Story 66. They should do whatever is best for them. If that means getting a new job that will not withhold pay for a month because legislators refuse to do their job, so be it. Story 67. I'm surprised they stayed so long in something that's stressful without getting paid. Story 68. I'm stuck at an airport right now. I'm not happy about it, but I understand. Story 69. Frankly, I am surprised so many people stayed at their jobs. I would quit the day an employer told me to work without pay, especially if the employer was intentionally interfering with benefits I might be using. Story 70. We all work explicitly to get paid. Why else would we show up? Story 71. In the long run, I hope this is good and that the experience forces the creation of a contingency fund to pay employees during shutdowns of this kind. Story 72. Working for a month without pay in a high-stress environment is insane. We also had a problem that, even before the shutdown, air traffic control was short-staffed. Story 73. That's a tough spot. The economy isn't great, so I understand why they held out for so long. Plus, a job as an air traffic controller can be pretty cushy once you attain sufficient seniority. Story 74. They should allow interest to be applied to withheld payments. I do not believe failing to pay was part of the contractual obligation on day one. Story 75. They should do what is best for themselves. If they have options, allow them to pursue those options. Story 76. It always happens when I want to fly somewhere. Goodness gracious. Story 77. I say they should have stopped working as soon as they learned they weren't going to be paid. Story 78. Good. I fully support it. Perhaps the collapse of the airline industry will finally make the public appreciate that politics and elections have consequences, and that people should pay closer attention than watching a few television ads and memes before deciding whom to vote for or whether to vote. The air traffic controller situation has been in decline since President Reagan dismissed most of them in the 1980s. A family member tried to become an air traffic controller a few years ago and did not even last a year. Given their stories, I am surprised it took a shutdown for air traffic controllers to have a mass exodus. Story 79. Is it just me? Or does the fate of 340 million people resting on the decisions of 349 people mean that governmental power and federal positions are not really in the people's hands? Story 80. One of the most stressful jobs on earth. Already short-staffed and overworked, and not federally protected during a government shutdown, which is unreasonable. Meanwhile, politicians continue to get paid. The current administration appears likely to allow this to continue while seeking to cut benefits and showing no respect. It feels like staying in an abusive relationship. The only sane option for many, especially younger employees, is to walk away. That will make the workforce shortage worse in the long run, in jobs that take 6 months or more to train someone in years before they can work independently. Story 81. Would you work for free for a month with no end in sight? If the government does not care about public safety and services, then why should they? Story 82. I think that if your employer does not pay you, you do not have to work for them. Story 83. Not much. They are doing what we all do, looking after their own interests. I am surprised more did not quit sooner. Story 84. Air traffic control is the most stressful job in the world. Would you do it for free? Story 85. Would you do your job for 6 weeks without pay? Me neither. Story 86. Honestly, I cannot blame them. That is an insane amount of stress with no pay. Anyone would be thinking about quitting at this point. Story 87. I would have quit after a week. In the words of Cage the elephant, I got bills to pay, I've got mouths to feed, ain't nothing in this world for free. Story 88. I think it is about time that someone grew a spine and stood up to that crazy tyrant you call your president. Story 89. Hopefully they are applying for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program so they can still eat, at least. Oh wait. Story 90. I wouldn't have waited so long to quit. I would have done it on the day the government shut down. There was no way Donald Trump and the Republicans had a quick solution. They were prepared to burn everything down to get their way. Story 91. Reagan called their bluff in the 1980s. They got screwed over by that. They have been talking about it since then, and the new crowd has fewer benefits and fewer reasons to stay. Thanks. Reaganomics. Story 92. This may show my ignorance, but is it feasible for airports and airlines to pay for air traffic control temporarily to keep their businesses afloat? Or are there too many air traffic controllers for them to shoulder the cost? Story 93. You cannot blame someone for not working if they are not getting paid. However, if the shutdown ends shortly, continuing not to work would probably be unwise. These jobs require a significant amount of training and build seniority over time. Neither of those characteristics makes them poor jobs, and I doubt these positions translate directly to a higher-paying, private sector job with benefits. Story 94. I have more than 20 years of experience and I live in a small city. What choice do I realistically have other than waiting it out? I cannot change careers at this point in my life. Story 95. Isn't this one of the conservatives' mantras? When someone complains about pay or benefits, the response is, so find a better job. Story 96. Considering the shutdown is effectively over, or will be in a few days once the House of Representatives passes the bill, I don't see why they would suddenly quit their jobs when back pay is coming within days. That would be like cutting off one's nose to spite one's face. Most people won't be able to get another job quickly, so they would just be making things much worse for themselves. Story 97. I wouldn't want to be in their situation, and I understand. I have a flight to Miami from Toronto this Friday that I booked months ago, and I hope it goes smoothly. Story 98. The wildest part of the shutdown is that service members planning to leave the military are being placed on stop-loss orders, meaning their contracts are extended because the government employees who process required separation paperwork were furloughed. This means that if the shutdown continued, there could be a point where service members do not get paid and legally cannot leave the military. Story 99. I imagine some will quit. It is a stressful enough job without the added pressure of not being paid. Many earn good salaries, so if they have a financial safety net they could manage, but not everyone will. It also seems government shutdowns in the United States are becoming more frequent and longer, so this shutdown will likely dissuade people from becoming air traffic controllers if they expect this to be a regular occurrence. This is a huge problem, since air traffic controllers were already short-staffed. Story 100. The government can pay them. That is the sad part. They are choosing not to, hoping to make enough people suffer so concessions will be more favorable to those in office. When politicians interfere with the public's livelihood, such as being paid for their jobs or receiving assistance to buy groceries, that is a serious problem. Story 101. I wish they had started calling out and threatening to resign sooner. The last shutdown ended because there were not enough air traffic controllers, and they hold more power than most people realize. When the wealthy cannot fly either, it suddenly becomes a bigger problem that must end the shutdown. It was ridiculous that they went so long without pay. It should never happen. Story 102. Why would they not? Working for free does not make sense when you need to pay bills, feed yourself, and pay rent. Story 103. Imagine taking a government job and not knowing this would happen. Story 104. I am thinking that we probably need air traffic controllers in Canada. We have mousse and maple syrup. Please consider coming over. Story 105. Unfortunately, that is exactly what the architects of Project 2025 want. They are eager for a reason to take it private, and this may give them one. Story 106. That's a tough spot. No one should have to choose between work and survival. Story 107. I believe they should do what is best for them and their families. I would also be surprised if they were not all involved in a lawsuit against the government for back wages. Story 108. They need to take the best available option for themselves on an individual level. They should always be paid no matter what. Congress should not be paid during any government shutdown. I will not fly when my life depends on an exhausted, hungry, financially struggling, angry air traffic controller who is working 2 jobs to support their equally exhausted and angry family. It is an insane scenario. Story 109. They should not work when they are not being paid. It is a job, not volunteer work. Story 110. The Transportation Security Administration would have an easier time of it. No offense to them, most of them at least, but they generally do not have highly specialized skill sets, and to the extent they do, that work can be done elsewhere. Air traffic controllers are backed into a corner. To be an air traffic controller in the United States, you generally work for the Federal Aviation Administration, the military, or a contractor that provides services to one of those organizations. Story 111. As someone who is traveling soon, it is disappointing, but it is far worse for people who are not being paid. Story 112. I would have walked off the job on day 1. My time is not free. I work so I can live. I do not live so I can work. I fully support anyone who is not willing to work for free in such a critical position. Story 113. Maybe they'll find a job they enjoy. Lots of people are stuck in jobs they hate because they fear change. Story 114. Good for them. Work somewhere where you are appreciated, which is clearly not a place operated by the United States government. Story 115. It's insane that they're expected to just keep going. To quit too. Story 116. It is an untenable situation. You cannot keep going to work and not get paid. Credit card payments, car payments, and rent or mortgage payments do not stop. You need to be paid, and if you need another job to make that happen, you have no other choice. Story 117. Let's remove this despot from office and ensure they receive their back pay. Story 118. I hope they can find something that pays. This situation is utter bullshit for them. Story 119. Don't blame them at all. While it looks like the Democrats have snatched defeat from the jaws of victory and backed down, and this will probably be over at some point this week, there is a very good chance we will end up doing this a few more times before Trump is out of office. It's almost a guarantee, I would think. I'd be looking for work elsewhere myself if I were an air traffic controller at this point. I know it pays well, but the instability just wouldn't be worth it to me. Story 120. Maybe there is a job nearby with government-level benefits and a comparable salary where you work at a computer, speak with people, and your specialized training and experience are valued. Story 121. It does not matter. The Democrats capitulated, so the government is reopening soon. Story 122. No matter how much you may like your job, it is still a transaction. Even if I were doing my favorite thing in the world, I would not spend more than 40 hours per week doing it for free, especially in a society that tells us our only worth is how much we can contribute to capitalism. Story 123. Many other federal workers are working without pay. We keep the country running smoothly and have been offered little or no assistance or leeway with creditors, banks, and housing payments. A continuing resolution would simply mean we would have to go without a paycheck in January again. Higher-ups' advice is to go to food pantries. Story 124. Why did they wait so long? Did the politicians go without pay? If the government isn't providing services, it doesn't get to collect taxes. You don't work. You don't get paid. That's capitalism, right? Story 125. Their mortgage providers and car loan servicers do not give two wet shits about their inability to pay, and the government certainly is not going to protect them from foreclosures and repossessions. Fuck yeah, they should quit. Story 126. Good. They should. No other developed country does this shutdown ritual every few years. It is avoidable. Maybe if one of these lasts long enough and breaks enough things, we will make changes. Story 127. They should go. Unfortunately, this is another consequence of Donald Trump's inability to govern. No one can work forever for free, especially given the uncertainty about whether they will receive back pay. Mortgage companies do not wait. Story 128. One time my wife got a new job. It was a work-from-home job helping direct callers to the right place for health insurance. The company was contracted by the healthcare company. The contract was brand new, signed 2 days before my wife was hired. It was a complete mess. One of the many problems was human resources and payroll. There was no direct phone number at the time, only an email address. My wife worked 2 weeks without pay, then another 2 weeks. It was supposed to be her first payday and she did not get paid. She thought maybe it was supposed to be the next day, but nothing happened. She reached out to her supervisor, who said they were supposed to have been paid the prior day. The supervisor told her to email payroll, so she did for a week straight. Then her supervisor said to try human resources, so she emailed them for a week. At that point, it was payday again. Not including the initial 2 weeks, she had worked a month and a half and was supposed to have been paid twice. Her supervisor, her boss, and my wife were all sending emails to human resources and payroll, but no one could get a hold of them. My wife's supervisor was keeping track of her hours, as was my wife. After 2.5 months working 40 hours a week, she still had not received a paycheck. No one could be reached in human resources or payroll. Phone numbers simply did not exist. My wife was sending 2 emails a day to both departments. I was working, so we were kind of okay for a while, but we were quickly going under. 4.5 months later, human resources contacted my wife's supervisor, not to clear up the payroll issue, but to fire my wife. Why? Because she had been working off the clock. She had worked roughly 720 hours without a single paycheck, trying the entire time to get someone to correct the issue while continuing to work in hopes it would be fixed. To finally hear back from human resources and get fired for the very problem she had been trying to fix the whole time was devastating. By that point, we were 2 months behind on the mortgage and the car payments, and 1 month behind on the water bill. Her supervisor argued with human resources, and my wife argued with them, but the decision was upheld. We went to a lawyer. In the end, it was not deemed wrongful termination because, apparently, my wife should have called human resources or payroll, which at the time had no phone numbers. My wife's supervisor even confirmed this on her behalf. All we got was the money she was owed for time worked, paid roughly 6 months after she started. I do not know how I feel about the current government shutdown situation. On one hand, I know how hard it is to work for a quarter of a year and not get paid. On the other hand, government workers know they will eventually be paid, and the shutdown is a recurring political game where officials use people as leverage. Bills do not stop, but if you can prove you are a government worker, many collectors and businesses will be sympathetic. For example, in my area, the power company, which also provides internet, and the water company are postponing government workers' bills until the government reopens if you provide proof of employment. I understand that is not the case everywhere, but it does happen. That kind of help is not something we received when my wife and I went through this. We told our mortgage company and submitted proof from my wife's supervisor and the supervisor's boss, as well as bank statements, but it did not matter. They did not help. I am conflicted about how I feel. I feel guilty thinking this way, But I am being honest. Story 129. They should strike or at least protest and make demands for future stability. Story 130. They are not quitting. You do know that the Transportation Security Administration has a naturally high turnover rate for transportation security officers. Story 131. Reagan fired all air traffic controllers years ago when they organized and threatened to strike. Turnabout is fair play. Story 132. I read conspiracy forums, and one post that caught my attention claimed this was a deliberately manufactured situation to prompt air traffic controllers to walk off the job of their own accord, so it could be treated as a breach. I do not understand why not paying wages would not count as a breach. The alleged goal was to introduce artificial intelligence to manage these airline systems. Story 133. Terrible situation. If I were a billionaire, I would have extended job offers to every one of them on day one. The sooner it is clear to everyone that the country is being broken on purpose, the sooner we can move on to a more reasonable dialogue. Story 134. I feel for them. However, if they quit, what would they do? It is not like they can get another job of the same type right now. Story 135. Good. They should not have been forced to work without pay in the first place. It should be illegal. When the government shuts down, federal workers who are not paid should not be required to work. That happens when essential work is not included in mandatory spending. It is that simple. Story 136. Frankly, I think they were a little foolish to stick around in the first place. If they had all walked out together, I bet they would already be getting their paychecks again. But I understand. That only works if all the ants actually work together. Story 137. Why would they quit now when the government is about to reopen and pay them? Story 138. You cannot blame them. I am surprised they went a month without pay. We all have bills and mouths to feed. Story 139. I am not saying this is not a terrible situation. It is. However, as someone familiar with it, be aware that no one accepts those jobs without being told up front that a potential shutdown is a condition of employment. You are told when you start and are reminded regularly before any potential shutdown. Other than having to work without pay, it is not much different from other jobs such as steelworking, healthcare, and coal mining, where people go on strike and do not get paid. Story 140. The Transportation Security Administration is one thing, but air traffic controllers provide real value. They perform a service that saves lives and is unappreciated. Story 141. My mom was an air traffic controller and lived through a couple of these. She saved up her paid time off so that if a shutdown happened, she could take time off, because working without pay is bullshit even if you will be paid eventually. Story 142. As for Transportation Security Administration employees, I hope they find other jobs and do not return. I think the air traffic controllers should all resign. They will be rehired a week later at higher pay, forcing the government to reopen. Story 143. I would have quit immediately. No pay means I would not provide any services. Story 144. I am going to be honest. If my employer cannot pay for a single day, I am already out. Story 145. Honestly, how many people would stay in their current job if they were not paid for a month? Story 146. Do you mean the same people who will have to work without pay next time? If that were my work environment, I would leave. Story 147. They have worked for over a month too long, in my opinion. In other countries, people would generally assume they would stop working the moment the government stopped paying them for partisan reasons. Story 148. No pay, no work. It's that simple. I would not have worked from day one. Story 149. The disdain shown by the administration toward all federal employees is undeserved and unconscionable. It's a slap in the face to we the people who pay taxes for our safety. Supporters of Make America Great Again may get a kick out of the cruelty, but they have to fly too. Story 150. I'm waiting for some billionaire to say we can just replace them with artificial intelligence. Story 151. As a human, I understand that people need to pay their bills. Mortgage companies do not want to foreclose and will have more tolerance for furloughed employees than for unemployed or underemployed people. But it will be difficult to obtain a refinance or a new loan. Affording repairs becomes difficult, And buying food is harder when you do not qualify for assistance such as the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which is also affected. Story 152. Of course they quit. Who would? Your landlord does not care if the government shuts down. Your utility company does not. The grocery store is not going to give you food on credit with a promise to pay later. I live week to week. If one paycheck were missing, it would be disastrous. Story 153. They need money. Their bills are not going to wait until they receive payment. Story 154. If my employer stops paying, I take a walk. What is there to say here? It seems obvious. Story 155. The system counts on guilt to keep essential workers from walking out. The message says think of the passengers. Meanwhile, those same passengers would not last a week without a paycheck. Quitting would be an act of self-respect. Story 156. How are they continuing to pay for childcare, gas money and parking, and other work-related expenses if they are not getting paid? That is why some cannot continue working for free, not to mention the added stress of an already stressful job. Story 157. It is unfortunate they do not get paid proactively, but this is disclosed when they accept the job. No one was surprised at the last minute. Story 158. I think air traffic control should be paid before any congressional wonk. I am not a fan of the Transportation Security Administration. It is just another unnecessary government agency. Story 159. I'm surprised it took them this long to clue in. They all need to walk off the job and protest not being paid. Shut all airports down. Maybe that will get the rest of America riled up, since nothing else is working. Story 160. They have endured their misery. It should now be shared with the public. Story 161. Air traffic controllers are not good because we are already short-staffed. Transportation Security Administration? I thought the only reason they were there was that they were otherwise unemployable. It's a jobs program, isn't it? Story 162. Their food hasn't become free, and their bills haven't gone away since they stopped getting paid. Why should they work for free? Story 163. It is ironic that Republicans can find a billionaire to fund occupation troops, but cannot find one to fund public safety. Story 164. I think I would do the same. I do not work for free or on promises. They do not pay my bills. Story 165. We humans, no offense intended, are like children reaching to touch a hot pan. Sometimes we need to feel the burn. Story 166. I think if my boss told me to work for free for a month, I would be controlling a lot more than just traffic from my couch. Story 167. Employees are advised that a situation like this could occur when they sign on. I would take a week off. Story 168. They will be rehired quickly. We do not have anyone to replace them. Story 169. I cannot imagine the Transportation Security Administration is a job that 99% of people join for the love of the game, especially not enough to tolerate a few weeks of unpaid work. Story 170. As my mother used to ask when I told her my plans, why don't you? Story 171. I would have started submitting applications on the second night of the shutdown. I do not know what their benefits look like, but even with good pay, I do not blame them for wanting to leave this seemingly annual cycle. Story 172. Who would want to work without pay? Please raise your hand. Story 173. It is pretty shitty because we are going to get the worst of it while still losing the Affordable Care Act because of turncoats like Fetterman. Story 174. As an outsider, I do not understand why they did not act immediately. They are softening the impact. If they had stayed and only allowed emergency flights, I would have saluted them, but I think they are helping the wrong people. I might be wrong. Story 175. I do not blame them. I would not be working if I were not getting paid. And with Schittler 34 saying he would not pay back wages, I would have quit the minute I heard that. Story 176. Most Americans are one missed paycheck away from poverty. The system is designed that way by the ultra-wealthy and their backers to keep people desperate for work in a society that offers less and less value for their money. Story 177. Good luck finding another job in this Trumpflation economy. The massive sales taxes and tariffs are killing any hope of new jobs. Story 178. Damn. Working for free in a capitalist economy. What happens when you need to pay the bills? Story 179. They should receive a bonus equal to 1 month's pay. It is unfair that they had to work while others stayed home and were paid. I am not suggesting that anyone else be unpaid. Rather, those who worked should receive double pay. Story 180. Imagine a plane full of politicians running out of fuel, headed for a crash, and no one is willing to chip in. If a company did that to me, I would seriously consider how close to self-destruction they were. I hope all employers feel the obligation to pay wages. Story 181. If they eventually receive the backdated pay, and there are no consequences from quitting, such as issues with their pension or benefits, they should be able to start immediately if they have another job lined up. Story 182. I think it will be funny when Trump refuses to pay them their back pay because they quit. I know he can't do that, but since when has that stopped him? Story 183. It's an extremely stressful, high liability job, and now they cannot pay their bills. I would have walked away sooner. Good for them. Shame on our government for letting things get to this point. Story 184. They have stayed too long already. It is ridiculous and stressful. The president and the Republican Party are 100% to blame. Story 185. They should, and it is time for someone to kick some ass on Capitol Hill. Story 186. The Democrats caved and lost healthcare for millions. They are spineless. Air traffic will be back to normal. Air traffic controllers will not quit en masse. Story 187. It would be a net gain if the Transportation Security Administration quit. The agency consists largely of high school dropouts who cause delays and still miss 40% of the threats they are expected to detect. Air traffic control is a different story. Story 188. Trump has said there is a new modernized system for air traffic control that will be coming online very soon and will make air traffic control in the United States much more efficient. I would not be shocked if many air traffic controllers lose their jobs. The system is expected to be installed in every tower at every airport in the United States. Story 189. Aren't there employment laws in each state that prevent people from being taken advantage of like this? If International Business Machines decided not to pay its employees but demanded they show up to work while at the same time paying the top executives who decided not to pay staff, the company would be in court paying fines, forced out of business by bad press, and held accountable. The United States government should suffer the same fate. Enough of these sociopathic political scumbags. It is time for new leadership on both sides of the aisle and term limits for those who have been making millions off American taxpayers. Story 190. The only way America can recover from this insane wealth inequality without mass bloodshed is a general strike. The people in power intend to kill to stay in power. They are putting all the pieces in place right in front of us and daring us to fight back. You and your children will lose your house, your savings, and your health care anyway, so what are we waiting for? The children are already going to be slaves for life, and saying you need to keep working to raise them to be slaves for life seems like a betrayal at this point. Do you not think so? Story 191. I can't say I blame them. I wouldn't stick around if I were in that situation, especially since they were told there will be no back pay. It is the biggest slap in the face in my opinion. Story 192. If I were them, you would not catch me voting for a Democrat. Story 193. The pending legislation to end the shutdown provides for back pay, so quitting now would be really dumb. Story 194. It is easy for me to say because I have not experienced it. I understand it to some extent, but we all know they will receive back pay. It works like that every time. Quitting does not solve the problem. It creates a new one. A month is a long time to go without pay. How do you find a job for only a month unless you completely switch careers? I would say quitting in this case is not a smart decision unless you are in dire financial straits. You were probably in that situation a month earlier. My mother works for the government. She has an emergency fund for government shutdowns because it has happened to her 3 times. She is fairly financially stable. Story 195. The new bill says all federal employees will receive back pay. So it would not be very smart to bail now. Have they been in the job market recently? Story 196. I honestly wish they would. Congress and the President of the United States are not listening to the people. They are actively making our lives worse. Writing them does not work. Calling, faxing, emailing, and lobbying do not work. There are only two things that will make them listen: shutting the country down economically or a legitimate armed uprising. There is no goddamn sense to what they are doing. They only serve their corporate overlords and the people. Get fucked. None of them have to worry about their health care. None of them have to worry about going hungry. None of them even have to worry about showing up for work. The House of Representatives has been on vacation for a month during a fucking crisis. They do not care about us. They have rigged the maps and the elections and act like we do not see it. Nothing short of something completely shocking will get their attention. We have lunatics running government. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.